On today's video, I'll be interviewing a young man named Christopher Polanco, who has been attacked with a form of diabetes that is called Lada, which is sort of a slow-progressing diabetes that results in little to no pancreatic function. And yet, amazingly, Chris has found answers to this diabetic condition. He uses no insulin, and he has excellent blood sugar control. Well, folks, I'm happy to have with me a young man, a relatively young man by the name of Christopher Polanco. Christopher, welcome to Beat Diabetes.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And, you know, it seemed like each time we've been doing a video with an interview, that is, we've been having a new first with our interviews, and in your case, this is also a first. This is the first situation where Lada was involved, and we'll go ahead and let you explain that in a little bit. But first, tell us your age, Christopher.
I'm actually 28 years old. I'll be 29 in March.
Okay, so much younger. A lot of people think of diabetes as an old person's disease. A guy like me who has got the wrinkles showing and clearly has been around for a few years, but you're still young and fresh, and yet you're faced with this monster along with all the rest of us. And you first discovered as a result of an ER trip. So obviously, when you go to this wasn't just a doctor visit with the doctor saying you have a problem. This you knew something was wrong. You maybe weren't sure what it was. So tell us what led up to that decision to go to the ER.
So what happened was I was taking a physical fitness class in my college that I was attending at the time. And obviously I would weigh myself in every day. And I started noticing that I was dropping quite a bit of weight. I believe I started at about 210 pounds. And that was in December. And by the end of December, when my semester had come to a conclusion, I went from about 210, I dropped to maybe 180, 185 range. I didn't think anything of it. I thought maybe, hey, the program's working. But then I started getting the more effective symptoms, which are, cotton mouth. I was always thirsty and frequent urination in the night. And I kind of figured, well, maybe I have some type of infection or something. But my wife is actually a nurse, and she was the one who told me, these symptoms kind of familiarized with diabetes, but nobody in my family has any history of it. So to me, I didn't even know what that was to begin with. So I just thought, okay, well, I'll go to the doctor. And then that's when I went in and realized that my A1C was 12.7 and my fasting blood sugars was 285. So that was how I found out.
Yeah, and those are very high numbers. I'm sure you had no idea when you went in that those numbers would be higher, that you'd even get those numbers. But I assume that the doctors told you had a pretty serious condition.
Yeah, they had told me that for sure my blood sugars had been over 300 for multiple months. They kind of explained to me that the A1C shows your readings for the past 3 months. So I could only imagine the type of damage I had been doing previously from not even knowing to begin with.
So what did they recommend? Did they want to put you on medicine immediately, insulin? Where did they go with that?
Yeah, so when I got in and they kept me for about 3 days, they were giving me insulin constantly, but it really wasn't being effective. They'd get me 1-2 units of the fast acting right after I would eat, and throughout the night they would come check my blood sugars, and I would be reading in the 150s to 200. And they just told me, your diet's going to have to change. The typical thing they usually tell people, 60 to 80 carbs, watch your sugar intake, things like that. And I noticed that when I came home, it just wasn't working for me like they had told me it should. Even if I was using the fast acting and the slow acting, I would still get readings like fasted in the morning in the 180 range. So I thought, this isn't the way that it's going to get better, or I got to make a change.
Yeah, it sounds like you became acquainted with the glucometer fairly quickly. You were checking yourself frequently and observing that this wasn't working. Is that what you were doing, using a standard glucometer?
Yeah, it's funny, when I first got released, they kind of swarm you with so much information that it's hard to even keep up with what they're telling you. They just kind of hit you with your life's going to change completely, sorry about your diagnosis, and they try to cram as much information as they can in these 3 days, so that when I actually left the hospital and I was on my own for the first day, I couldn't remember how to even put the the glucose stick on the glucometer and how to prick my finger. I had no idea how to do it. It took me about, I want to say, like 30 minutes, and I had to look it up on YouTube how to actually poke my finger. So I knew that wasn't going to work, and I actually, my wife's a nurse too, so I really got into it, and she helped me out a lot. And she's learning as the time goes on too, since she's a new nurse.
Reminds me of me, Christopher. When I took my very first blood sugar test, I was actually at where I worked at the office, but the secretary had a kit, and her husband was diabetic, so she showed me how to use it and so forth. And I was so nervous, I must have poked myself 4 or 5 times before finally getting it to where it would work for me. Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. So you're checking, but apparently it didn't take you very long to figure out, here's where I need to be. This doesn't seem to be working. My numbers are too high. You did a little research, or maybe your wife helped you to kind of figure out where you wanted to be. Is that right?
Yeah, so when I first got released, I was really like nervous, scared, really emotional, because I didn't know anything about this disease. So to find out the long-term possible complications, the shortening of life, I really spent a lot of time researching in the nighttime. I would stay up till 2, 3 in the morning, finding out like what to eat, what to drink, what to avoid. And I didn't want to take necessarily the conventional Western medicine approach. I was seeking out other ways because I've seen people, they're always like, I do insulin, but something just doesn't make my sugars go down. So that's what led me to the low carb diet. And then I came across your channel, which really, was a game changer for me. I had no idea that, it kind of sat with me a little bit at the hospital. Like if I'm high blood sugars because of carbohydrates, why am I being fed this food at the hospital and they're not seeing any results, positive results at the hospital? So I just kind of clicked all together from research and what I was experiencing at the hospital, that it really boils down to your diet a lot. If you're really trying to take your diabetes serious and live a long life, it really boils down to your dietary choices and the sacrifice you have to make pretty much for the rest of your life.
Yeah. So you were doing all this research. Was most of it on YouTube, or you're looking up a lot of websites as well?
Yeah, I would look up on YouTube quite a bit. Your channel, Dr. Bernstein's, there's a bunch of people, Dr. Sean Baker, who focuses on diet a lot. And I just did a lot of research on that, even websites, forums where you could go, like Google, what to take to help. I looked up what herbs, I even tried the herb route, what herbs would help lower your blood sugars, things like green tea, there's a bunch, berberine, a bunch of different ones. And that's pretty much, I've realized that diet is really important. And, if it's not through insulin, and if that's not making the improvement that you're looking for, then maybe you should look outside the box and see what else, your lifestyle choices that you're making that could be causing this high blood sugar.
One of the problems with research, although, I strongly believe in it, but you come across, 5, 6, 7 different approaches, people saying different things. How did you settle, finally on the course that you ended up taking when there are people saying almost the exact opposite of others?
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error. This may not be for everybody, but I did a lot of trial and error. I've tried so many different things, from herbs, fasting, low carb, high fat, low carb, just a bunch of different things. And, it just came to trial and error and realizing that low carb was really what worked out for me. And I'm still new to this. I barely got diagnosed a little bit over a year ago, so I'm still experimenting with what I can and can't eat. So there is days where I want to try something new, a new recipe that I found, and I realize, you know what, it just doesn't work for me. It may work for others. So it's a lot of trial and error and figuring out what it is exactly that works for you.
But apparently a part of it was just the logic of the fact that you figured out that carbohydrates raise blood sugar. So if your problem is high blood sugar, it might not be such a bad idea to limit those carbohydrates. Is that right?
Yeah, it kind of relates to people who have allergies to anything. If you eat peanuts, you're going to avoid the food that's making you sick. So I kind of correlated to that. If I kind of see it, not necessarily this is what's proven, but I see it as an allergy. If it's making me sick, I have to try to avoid it as best I can.
Right. So when you first went to the ER and they tested you, they were assuming you were type 2, but somewhere down the line, you got a different diagnosis of Lada. Tell us when that happened, how that happened, and what in the world is Lada?
Yeah, so when I was at the hospital, they were really confused with my case because, I was showing signs of a little bit of both, but based off my age, they couldn't consider me a type 1. And most of I would say, I saw so many different doctors, but about 80% of them were telling me, there's no way you're a type 1. You're definitely a type 2. Because at the time I was a little bit chunky and I lost a lot of weight. So they were just like, yeah, you're young. Usually you see type 1s in, juveniles. So there's no way you could be a type 2. So I left the hospital thinking I'm a type 2. They told me, you're still going to need insulin because for some reason your sugars are not going down. But in a couple weeks, you come back to your primary doctor and we may prescribe you metformin once we see that you're more regulated. So a few months go by, I go to the doctor and he told me to take just the nighttime insulin, which is the slow acting, and do small amounts of units. And I started noticing that as I changed my diet and the units were starting to come down, I would need less and less because I was having episodes of low blood sugar pretty bad to where I would wake up some days in the 40s, 48, 47, some days in the 50s.
And by this point, you were eating pretty low carb, right?
Yes. Yeah, I had switched over to low carb, so I started seeing that my readings were pretty drastically low in the morning, and that's without fast acting. It was all low amounts of the slow acting, and I was still getting low readings. So when I went back to my doctor, he pretty much told me, let's try you without nothing and see how that goes. And at the same time, he also had written an appointment for me to go see my endocrinologist. And when I went to go see my endo, that was when she ran a test to check my beta cells to see if I had any of the cells that show that you're a type 1, and I tested positive. So that's when she told me, yeah, you're definitely a type 1, but since you kind of show signs of both, you're going to be more likely diagnosed as a Lada, and that's where I'm at right now.
Okay, so I looked up Lada. It stands for Latent Autoimmune Diabetes of Adulthood. The thing that throws a lot of doctors off, apparently, is the fact that, they expect type 1 is going to happen when you're a child, maybe 8, 9, 10, whatever. And here you are in your later 20s, and you're showing some signs of type 1. And yet, you are apparently producing some insulin, but not really enough. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, I went to my doctor yesterday and I wanted to get tested on that to see how much exactly I'm producing, or if any, because one thing I've noticed is that there has been a few times that I've switched back to trying to eat carbohydrates, and it just skyrockets my blood sugars to the point where I kind of freak out and choose not to go that route anymore for a couple weeks until it comes back down to normal. So he's kind of thinking that if I do have any, it's very minimal. So he's kind of surprised that just by the diet change, it's been helping so much.
Yeah, I talked to you earlier before we did this interview, and we were just talking about different things. And I think you used the expression, or you gave me the impression, that Lada is considered a sort of a slow motion type 1, whereas a true type 1, a child may be perfectly fine one day, and within a few days or a week, they may have no pancreatic function at all. I mean, just almost instantly, they lose it all. Whereas with Lada, it happens more slowly. Am I saying something like you told me before?
Yeah. So what I was told is that my endocrinologist told me I will definitely need insulin. It's just a matter of when. And she says that it could be in 1 month, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, up to 20 years. We don't know. It's just a slow process, and we're all different. So she said I will eventually need insulin. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. And we hope that doesn't happen. But I mean, if it does happen, there's worse things in the world than just giving yourself an insulin shot. So it's not like some horrible tragedy that you have to do that. But at any rate, you're doing well. Do you know what you said your A1C initially was around 12 something?
Yeah, initially I got diagnosed with 12.7, and after my 3-month visit, I brought it down to 5.4, and at that time I had used insulin for about a month, and it brought it down from a 12.7 to a 5.4, and then after the next initial 3 months, after the 5.4, it went up to 5.6, just taking care of my diet, not insulin at all.
Yeah, those are amazing numbers, Christopher. There's a lot of type 1s that don't even ever approach the 5s, even though they can take as much insulin as they want, but they just never get it anywhere close to that. You got it down from the 12s to the 5s, 5.4, in 3 months' time. Much of that time you were doing low carb, is that right?
Oh, all the time, definitely.
Almost instantly from the time you got diagnosed, you figured out that low carb was the way to go, and you just immediately moved that direction.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the 5.4 was taking insulin and eating low carb, and then you were having hypos, right?
Yeah, so even when I had the 5.4, I was taking only the slow-acting insulin, and it was less than 10 units a day, and I would still have hypos. And then when I switched over to the no insulin, I only went up about 2 points, or 0.2, and that's with no insulin and just watching my diet. The hypos were also happening with the insulin, and which was a very, very scary experience. Waking up kind of confused, not knowing what's going on.
Yeah,
it was a very scary experience.
Well, strangely, I have had natural hypos. I've never taken insulin in my life, but my pancreas was so overreacting to my insulin resistance that it would pump out way too much insulin, and I would drop down into the 40s. Now, I don't know what your symptoms are. I'm going to have you tell us in a minute. And in my case, I would have a sensation that I was about to pass out. And in fact, one time I did pass out. Sometimes I felt kind of cool chills come over me. Very, very uncomfortable. So it was tremendous motivation. Some people look at me and they say, "Oh, Dennis, you're so motivated. You're more motivated than anybody I know." Well, if you get enough hypos, you'll be motivated too. That is not something you want to experience. So, Christopher, tell us a little bit about your hypos. Was it similar to mine? Anything different than that?
Yeah, so the way mine would typically happen was, since I would do only the nighttime insulin, I would wake up early in the morning when my wife would go to school. It'd be about 6 in the morning, and then I would wake up and I would all of a sudden feel like a really extreme heart palpitation, where I would get up, and as soon as I got up, it almost felt like my mind shut off. I was really confused and kind of like stuck staring at stuff. And my son, which made it even scarier, was actually laying next to me, looking at me, and I could hear him talking to me, asking me what's wrong, but I didn't know how to express it. I was almost like I was lost. And I happened to go downstairs, and I think I found 2 yogurts. I don't know how I remember that. That's what I needed to do. I ate those really fast, and within maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, I felt a lot better. But it took me a while, and it was very scary.
Yeah. Well, hypos are nothing to mess around with. Somebody left a comment, which under one of my videos, where they said diabetes can kill you in years. Hypos can kill you in a few minutes. So you do not want hypos at all. Now, you have stopped the insulin. I'm assuming you don't have hypos anymore at all.
No, not at all. If I do get low, it's my fault because I go long periods of time without eating. But the lowest would probably be in the low 70s. I never get to like the 40s or 50s. Nothing like that.
Right. And yet, without taking any insulin and having very minimal pancreatic function, you're still you're still having an A1C at 5.6 last time around. Is that correct?
Yes. Today, fasted in the morning, my blood sugars were about 92, I believe. So it's really impressive, what you could actually do with just the dietary change.
It is amazing. I mean, what you're saying is just beyond amazing. And people ought to sit up and take notice, Christopher, because you're telling us a powerful story. All right, what we want to do is we want to share with the people some of the dietary changes you made. When you make dietary changes, obviously there are things you cut out. There are probably some things you add in, things you eat now that you didn't. Tell us a little bit about that. You turned on a dime. I mean, you pivoted and turned on a dime and went to an entirely different diet. What did that look like for you, and how was it different from how you were eating before?
Yeah, so before, I didn't have the best dietary choices. I would drink, one thing is that I would drink a ton of soda. That was my kryptonite, pretty much, Coke. And I would remember my mom and my wife would always tell me, you're drinking a lot of Coke, and I would just kind of brush it off like, it's all right. My diet was a lot of soda, a lot of fast food. I would eat fast food multiple times a day. As a college student, it's just quick and convenient.
A lot of burgers and fries?
Yeah, oh yeah, a lot of burgers, fries. On a Friday after a hard week at school, I'd go to Little Caesars and pick up the biggest pizza I could find. So, it's really really bad choices. And the number one thing was definitely the amount of sugar I would consume with the amount of Coke I would drink. And after diagnosis, I completely cut out all of that. A typical day now would be in the morning for breakfast, eggs with sausage and maybe some keto pancakes. And if not that, I'll typically stick to egg, sausage for sure, type of protein. It's really low carb. And then for lunch, I could have a steak. A lot of vegetables is something I consume. Steak. I really focus a lot on protein and high-fat foods to keep me full, because I did end up losing quite a bit of weight from 210 when I was diagnosed over a year ago down to 156 right now.
And what is your height?
5'8".
Okay.
Yeah, so I actually went from low carb, and I'm right now in the process of transitioning to more of a carnivore diet to see if that will help me go up in weight. And it has, because I actually weighed before about 150 and I was having a lot of problems gaining the weight. So one of the things I did was try to focus more on a little bit higher protein intake. And it actually has been working for me. I've gone up about 6 pounds. So I'm going to continue this way. For sure, keep it low carb, but try to transition slowly, maybe not fully into carnivore, but a slow transition, just to see if my weight really truly does go up to where I look a little bit better.
Yeah. I get a lot of people ask me, how can I gain weight? I'm too slim and yet I need to eat keto. I'm no expert on that, but I do tell them, eat a lot of cheese and nuts. They're both low carb and high calorie, and it might help some. But in any case, it sounds like you're moving the direction you want to. So, I mean, Christopher, you're just doing amazing to have such poor pancreatic function and to have such outstanding you're getting A1Cs that people who have a pancreas that works 3 times, 4 times, 5 times as well as yours, but they can't get there. And here you are with a crippled pancreas that's barely functioning at all, and you've got outstanding numbers. You're kind of a walking miracle, my friend.
I appreciate that.
So you must be feeling pretty good about your future. I'm sure you feel good, in your health. Not taking any trips to the ER these days.
Definitely. It does take a little toll on your mental, because you're always having to focus on your diet and making sure that your blood sugars are within range. Physically, I feel perfect. I do karate twice a week. I go to the gym 5 days a week. So physically, I feel perfect, even better than before. Just mentally, you have your days where you wish you could eat something different because you see those around you eating that. But besides that, I'm very thankful that I was diagnosed, because I feel like in the long term, I was heading down the wrong path. And, this is kind of a wake-up call to, you really got to watch what you eat. And it could happen to anybody, because trust me, I never believed in a million years that I would have anything, because it just doesn't, nobody in my family has anything. So it's very, very humbling and eye-opening.
You are different than many of the people I interview, because most of the cases they'll say, yeah, I have diabetes in my family, my parents or my brother or whoever. You don't, and you had no hint of it until, within a short period of time you started losing all that weight, which is more typical of a type 1 or someone who's almost a type 1. Normally, when you have type 2 diabetes, your pancreas is working overtime and you're actually gaining weight. A lot of weight. So when you're losing weight like you were, that's a pretty good sign that your pancreas is not doing too well. But you're giving it a rest by doing the low carb or carnivore or, keeping those carbs down. You're not working it nearly so hard. I have a feeling, it's just a guess, that however long it may work, that you're going to stretch out the time your pancreas still works. And who knows, maybe it'll last you the rest of your life at this present level.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so. I just take it day by day, and whatever God wants to happen is going to happen. So I just leave it in His hands.
Right. Well, God bless you, Christopher. Why don't you just share a few words with people like you? You mentioned how that when you first got diagnosed, you were scared, you were nervous. It's not something anybody wants to face. Encourage some people out there that have just found out they have diabetes.
Yeah, definitely. If you're newly diagnosed with whether it's 1 or 2 and you feel scared, definitely normal. I'm pretty sure everybody goes through that. I would encourage you to do your research, definitely. And if you're somebody who's maybe doesn't have the opportunities or the resources to go low carb, I would recommend definitely doing your research online and doing the best you can, because that's all you can do. The best you can, and it's possible. You're looking at me. I should be on insulin, basically, and I'm not. So it is possible. It may not be for everybody, but it's worth a try, definitely, and see where it could take you, because you only get one life to live, and you definitely want to make the best of it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in one of your emails that you were thinking about starting a YouTube channel and talking about some of these things. Have you begun that yet?
I'm going to start next week. Definitely been busy with school, but I already have it set up. I'm just waiting to record my first video, which I'm going to do over the weekend, and I'll have it up on Monday. So if anybody wants to look me up, it's YouTube, and you can look up Christopher Polanco, and I will be there.
Thank you so much, Christopher. You're a blessing to just hear. You have a kindness about your spirit that I appreciate, and you've been a great interview. Thank you for sharing your story with our viewers.